Here we go. And if you have any questions, I love questions, so please post them in the chat and I will keep an eye out on that. I'm also going to share some slides with you in just a moment, and you will get a copy of these slides after class along with your recording. So don't worry about taking too many notes unless, of course, you would like to. So if you'll give me just a second here, I'm going to jump on and share the slides for everybody. Okay, there we go. If anybody's having a hard time seeing them, go ahead and let me know in the chat, but I'm going to dive in at this point. So again, our class today is called Natural Solutions to Boost Energy in Adrenal Fatigue. And I am so excited to share this information with you guys. Okay. Quick disclaimer. So this class, of course, is for educational purposes. I'm not diagnosing or treating at all, but I'm just sharing as much information as I possibly can with you today. So this is just a quick overview of what we're going to go through today. We have a lot to talk about. And again, what I want to begin with doing is creating a foundational understanding of the idea of what energy even is in our bodies. And we all know viscerally what energy is, because we know how we feel when we have energy, and we know how we feel when we don't have energy. But I'd love to share some other perspectives with you and hopefully give you an even bigger understanding of what energy is and how we can support it. Once we go through that, then we'll talk a little bit about energy production and how it relates to adrenal gland health. And then we'll talk about some more specifics and things that we can do to support our own energy in natural ways. So who am I? Why am I talking about this today? My name is Dr. Emily Wilson. I'm a naturopathic doctor and an acupuncturist. I am practicing in Prescott, Arizona, and I am the founder of Sanos Skincare and Sanos Anti-Aging Medicine. And as I have gone through my own life journey, my journey as a doctor, I've also been going through my own healing journey. And so all of those experiences combined actually inspired me to create something even bigger than just a practice and a skincare line, to create something, a whole new platform, which is called Sanos Wellness. And this is an online products and services marketplace that I wanted to create specifically to serve the adrenally fatigued woman. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of information that I have found which is just wrong. And so as a doctor, I would like to share as much information as I possibly can that's absolutely grounded in science and research and our understanding, not just from a Western medical model, but also from more ancient traditions. Because I'm also an acupuncturist, I have some understanding of Chinese medicine. I studied traditional Chinese medicine as part of my master's in East Asian medicine training. And there's so much richness and history and philosophy in a lot of other cultures as far as healing goes. And I'm really excited to build some of that into what we're going to be talking about today. If you'd like to learn more about Sanos Wellness, I posted the link there for you to check out, and it'll also be hyperlinked on the slides you're going to get. So again, Sanos Wellness, my baby. The whole philosophy behind Sanos Wellness is wellness through self-worth. And we're going to talk a lot more about what that means and why I would even bring that up to you today. So now let's dive into what we're actually going through today, what we're actually talking about. And that, again, big picture is energy production. So the way that energy relates with adrenal health. And so let's begin by talking about how are we even thinking about energy? And energy is something that's fundamental throughout not only the earth, but our entire universe. So energy is this universal force. And here on earth, it's manifested in many different ways through living and quote unquote non-living life forms. So we have, energy inside of our bodies. Animals have energy, plants have energy. But then things like water and fire have energy too. Even air has energy. So energy manifests itself in so many different ways. Again, not just on Earth, but also in our universe. So what does that mean for us as humans? So for us, the idea of energy has been around, of course, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And for me as an acupuncturist, I learned about energy as what's called chi. And then for me as a naturopathic doctor, we learned about energy as what's called our vital force. So this idea of an inherent energy source that animates and energizes our body has been around for thousands and thousands of years. And different cultures call it different things. Again, we have the idea of chi or ki or prana or vital force. And I'm sure there are a lot of other names that have come up throughout the centuries and the millennia. But those are just a few examples. So the idea of this essential inherent energy inside all of us that animates us has been around for a really long time. Now, as we have, as the Western world has developed and our Western medical system and thought processes have developed, we have gotten very focused on what's happening inside the body, not only at the level of the organs, but also at the level of the cells and inside the cells. So today, when we think of energy from a Western medical perspective, what we're really talking about is this idea of metabolism. But metabolism is the process inside the human body of energy creation. So it's the same thing. It's just taking a closer look under the hood, seeing how, the wheels are turning. So again, metabolism, I would equate metabolism with chi, with vital force, with prana. So that's a way that I'd like to approach our talk today, by understanding energy as something that is vital, that's inherent in our bodies. And whether we think of it as, our metabolic rate or as chi flow, doesn't matter. It's the same idea that we all have energy that is meant to be flowing freely in our bodies. And I mentioned earlier the idea that energy is not something that's just inside of us, but it's also inside plants, animals, and even the earth itself. So the elements that we're aware of, earth, air, fire, water, they all carry their own energetics as well. And there's energy that exists in each of these elements, on each of these levels, and there's always an interchange of energy happening. And the whole idea is that energy is always given and taken, and the flow of energy is always actually increasing. It's there's this universal law called the law of more life, and the idea behind that is that energy is meant to always be ebbing and flowing, but the general nature of energy is to grow and increase. So there is this great cycle of energy, not only in the universe, but also in the earth and our elements, and then of course in our bodies. And we're going to talk about how that shows up in our daily rhythms and in our hormonal cycles and in our circadian rhythm. So where does energy come from in the body? This is something that we kind of touched on in the last slide, but this idea of metabolism and our metabolic rate. Our metabolism is run by these small pieces inside of our cells that you can think of them as little engines, and they're inside every single cell in our bodies, with the exception of red blood cells. But they're inside our cells, and they're called mitochondria. And so our energy or metabolic rate is set at the level of mitochondria, which are inside every single one of our cells. And cells that need more energy, think muscle cells, heart cells, brain cells, are going to have more mitochondria. Cells that need less energy are going to have fewer mitochondria. But again, mitochondria are something that are always producing energy, and so they really set our metabolic rate. And so that's what we think of from a Western perspective as far as where energy comes from. Now, if we back up for just a moment and we think again about the idea from a more Eastern perspective, let's say qi, where energy comes from, the traditional Chinese medical system would say that energy comes from the earth. And when we consume things in the form of the food we eat and the air we breathe and the water we drink, those are big ones. That is all converted into qi inside of our bodies. So that I love because it's really the idea that what we put into our bodies becomes who we are. And so it's really important to consider what we're putting into our bodies because that will become our energy level. And we're going to talk a lot more about that. And hopefully at the end of our talk today, you will see why what we put in our bodies is so important, although you probably already had an idea about that. Now, there is also this idea in Chinese medicine of ancestral qi. It's also called Jing qi. We won't get too much into that, but that qi is spent throughout the course of our lives, but we spend it, it's basically anti-aging qi. If we preserve it by honoring our natural rhythms, our natural cycles, by sleeping, by resting, we preserve more Jing qi, more yin, which is also anti-aging. But if we're always going, we're not sleeping well, if we are consuming too many toxic products, that all burns up our anti-aging Jing qi and yin. So we want to avoid those things as much as possible. And again, I'm going to get more into detail about that because I really want to leave you with a good understanding of this. Now, on the right, you probably see this crazy chart of metabolic pathways. I absolutely loved biochemistry in school. We're not going to dive into this, I promise. But I wanted to give you this chart just to show you how complex and how beautiful our bodies are at this intracellular level, because these metabolic reactions are happening all over our bodies all of the time. They require a lot of vitamins, minerals, and nutrients to function optimally. And as you can see, there are so many steps going on all of the time. And so we'll talk about how if we're consuming too many toxins, the toxins can kind of get stuck in different areas of our cells and they slow down these processes. So ingesting too many toxins is actually going to be something that is bad, is bad for energy production as well. So again, metabolic pathways, big picture, there's a lot going on and we really need optimal tools available, vitamins, minerals, nutrients available to help all of these pathways run at an optimal level for energy production. And so there are a lot of causes of low energy levels, and we're going to go through them. I'm going to break them down for you. But again, big picture, there are a lot of potential places here where things can get tripped up. And so to naturally support our body's energetic production, we're going to want to do some of the things that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. So what does energy do inside of our bodies? And this might seem overly simplistic, but it's actually really important to think about because this is what optimal health is all about. And when one or more of these things are not functioning optimally, we can really feel it. And it can be really, really distressing. So we know that we're feeling healthy. We know that we have a lot of energy when our ability to function is optimized. And so energy affects things all over our body, everything from movement, and that can be our desire to move and exercise, and then our ability to sustain any kind of movement or exercise. For people who haven't exercised in a while, they might go for a 5 or 10 minute walk and feel really good about that, which is amazing. And then for other people, they might be able to go for, a 3-hour hike and feel great during that. And that's also amazing. So it's really about meeting yourself where you are and honoring that and, working with your body at that level and not trying to push it too hard. But again, our energy level determines not only movement, mood is another big piece. If our energy levels are chronically low, I'm sure you can imagine how low moods or depression would tend to creep in. Anxiety is another big one that people don't always associate with low energy, but we'll see that the adrenal glands get overstimulated when our energy gets really low, and that can actually cause anxiety. Apathy is another big symptom of low energy. Digestion slows down, sexual function and reproduction slows down. That includes libido. We need an appropriate amount of energy available to our bodies to have healthy sexual function, and then the ability to conceive and carry a pregnancy. Focus and thought are also higher functions that require energy, of course. Our will, our determination, our drive to do things, those are all also dependent on our energy levels. And then, of course, outside of our own bodies and what we want to do, there is the whole world that we can experience of relating to other people. So connecting with people, collaborating, having relationships, whether they're personal, professional, friendships, a mentor relationship, it doesn't matter, because these relationships also require energy. Okay, so what are some causes of low energy? And this is cool because the causes, when we step back and look big picture, the causes from an Eastern perspective and a Western perspective are pretty much the same thing. Now, big picture here, what we'll see is that in Eastern medicine, they say that the production of qi is impaired for a couple of big reasons. One is deficiency. So if we're not eating well, if we're not sleeping well, if we are overexerting and underproducing energy, those are all ways that we can become depleted. Another way in Chinese medicine that energy production is impaired is called stagnation. And in Western medicine, we can think of toxin buildup. Now, toxins can come from our food supply, and we'll break down a little bit more about what I mean by that, but they can come from foods, they can come from toxins that are in our environment as well. So those in Chinese medicine would all cause stagnation, which is also going to cause low energy. And if we think about it from a Western perspective, it makes sense that if we're not feeding our body well, if we're eating low vibration foods, if we are not eating enough food, if we are having, if we're overexerting and under resting, those of course can all be symptoms or causes of low energy production. And the other piece I want to introduce here is this idea of toxic burden or toxic buildup. So we live in a world where we're exposed to more and more toxins than we ever have been. And those toxins are coming from industrialization. So there's pollution in the air and the water. And then in the ground, there is, we're exposed to chemicals in our food supply. We're exposed to chemicals in our environment in the form of chemicals that are in cleaning products, bath and beauty products, chemicals that are coming from things like plastics, and certain other compounds that we're touching a lot. So there are a lot of potential causes of low energy, and we're going to really open the doors on those in just a moment and see what they are and how we can minimize our exposure to them. So again, here we go, move that up a little bit. 5 main things I want you to think about for potential toxin exposure, potential causes of low energy. And the first here, of course, is poor diet. Poor diet, big picture, I want you to think of low vibration foods. And a low vibration food, it probably makes sense, right? It's anything that has preservatives, artificial colors, artificial flavors, sugars, high fructose corn syrup, industrialized meat production. This is really bad for us. I'm a huge advocate of when we eat animal products, of eating organic and locally raised meat as much as possible. Meat and dairy products that are organic, that are grass-fed, and that come from happy animals are so important, because if we're eating products that come from stressed animals, we're eating stress hormones, unfortunately. That's just the truth of the world we live in. And so for people who do eat meat and do consume dairy products, go organic, go for, spend the money on the products that were made on farms, like happy farms. The idea of a low vibration food really is anything that is not fresh and that has chemicals in it. So a high vibration food would be something like fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, even cooked grains, things that are closer to their natural form, things that look like they did when they were growing on planet Earth. So that's a good way to think about a high vibration food versus a low vibration food. Another major cause of low energy production is pollution. As I mentioned, pollution is an introduction into our bodies of any kind of chemical that we are not used to, that our body then has to detoxify. And if we're exposed to more chemicals than our body can detoxify at one time, those chemicals are going to be stored in the tissues of our bodies. They're going to be stored inside of our cells, because those toxins are dangerous if they're just floating around in our bloodstream. So this is something that our bodies have done to try and protect us from the toxic buildup. But what happens then? So the toxins are stored inside of our cells, which means they're constantly exposed to our mitochondria, right? Our mitochondria are those little engines that make energy inside of our cells, and they're very delicate. And so they're extremely sensitive and susceptible to damage by toxins. So a lot of times when we have toxic burn-in, they are impairing, they're damaging our mitochondria, which slows down our metabolic rate, which manifests as low energy. So pollution is a huge cause of low energy today. An excess of toxic substances is also going to cause an increase in our toxic load, which is going to directly affect our mitochondria. Metabolic disruptors. This photo here is so profound to me. It's a picture of a piece of a plastic bottle floating in water. And if you think of the idea that we're, 70% water, this image is just so profound to me, because it's this idea that these little chunks of plastic can actually just be floating around inside of our bodies and even inside of our cells. And these metabolic disruptors, the plastics, the chemicals that are found in modern cleaning products, in scented products, even many scented candles and air fresheners, and then many of our commercially available beauty and body products are also full of metabolic disruptors. These are also known as hormone or endocrine disruptors, because not only are they affecting our metabolism, but they're also throwing our hormones out of balance. So there's a lot of potential damage that can happen here when we're constantly exposed to these chemicals. The final piece here is the idea of overexertion, overdoing it, and not getting enough rest. And so that just makes sense, right? If we're constantly pushing ourselves, our bodies don't get time to rest and repair. So if our mitochondria are damaged, or our cells are damaged throughout the course of the day, which just happens because we have billions of cells, they can certainly be repaired, or they can otherwise be handled and cleaned up. And that usually happens during sleep. But if we are sacrificing sleep, if we're sacrificing rest, then we are shifting the balance, and we are just spending more energy than we are creating. So if you think of like a bank account in negative balance, that is the idea here, with the idea of overwork and overdoing it. So what is the connection between energy production and our adrenal gland health? I love this idea because it is, they're so connected, and it's the brain-body connection that we're really talking about here. And so I love this. We're going to talk we're going to talk more about this, but one thing that I love about the adrenal glands and knowing the science behind what's going on is this: our adrenal glands are part of our endocrine system. So they're part of our hormonal system, but they also evolved when we were, babies. Before we were born, they evolved from nervous system tissue. So they actually are hardwired to our brains and our nervous system. So our adrenal glands are not only hormonal organs, but they're also nervous system or hormones. And so there's a huge connection there between what we perceive and then what our body does about it. And so that's really what the adrenal glands are trying to regulate for us. So again, adrenal glands and energy, it's all about the brain. Our adrenal glands are ancient organs, and they evolved to respond to stress or potential threats in our environment. So a predator, a tiger, a saber-toothed tiger, for example. If our brain recognized that there was a saber-toothed tiger in our environment, it would send a signal to our adrenal glands that we need to get out of here. So our adrenal glands would respond by secreting hormones that are going to mobilize energy. They're going to create energy for us because we need the energy to fight or we need the energy to flee. And so there were a lot of things that were happening when the brain recognized that threat. And it would send a message to the adrenal glands through what's called our autonomic nervous system. You may have heard of that. It is two parts. It is our parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest. The vagus nerve is a big nerve that's associated with that these days. The other part of the autonomic nervous system is the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight. And so those stress hormones were secreted via the sympathetic nervous system or the fight or flight nervous system. And they have actions that are going to happen all over our bodies. The hormones are, again, big picture, they're trying to raise and mobilize energy for us to fight or flee. So they're doing things like increasing our blood pressure, increasing our heart rate, making us breathe more rapidly and shallowly to try and get more oxygen into our bodies short term, because long term, shallow, rapid breathing is actually very unhealthy for us. They would also raise blood sugar levels, and they would raise muscle readiness or hyper alertness. So it's, the idea of being on edge. And in response, because we're giving all this energy to the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system shuts down. So that means we're not digesting our food. We're not thinking about resting. We're not thinking about reproducing. We're not thinking about creative thought. We are hyper focused on the problem, which in this case, in our example is a saber-toothed tiger. But this image of the woman on the right, I love it because this is our saber-toothed tiger today, right? It's all of the things we think we have to do. So she clearly has a saber-toothed tiger on her computer screen. Okay, what is adrenal fatigue? Why are we talking about this? And I want to stress that adrenal fatigue is a condition in functional medicine. It's not a disease, it's a condition in functional medicine, and it manifests in our bodies, in our minds, and even in our spirit. And we're going to talk about what I mean by that. The definition of adrenal fatigue essentially is a functional imbalance. It's not a disease. There are a lot of potential causes, and usually there are many causes for most people that have come into, that have come into play in the development of adrenal fatigue. And when we are talking about a functional imbalance, we have to address lifestyle factors. A functional imbalance will never be cured by medication. And lifestyle therapies are things like sleep, stress management, eating a really healthy diet. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And we want to stop a functional imbalance before it actually becomes a disease state. Now, the thing with adrenal fatigue, again, it's an imbalance. And so a woman can feel adrenally fatigued for years. To share my experience with adrenal fatigue, because I went through it for years and years. I had no energy at all. I was wired but tired for the most part. So I was exhausted all day. And then when I would try and go to sleep, I would be like hyper alert. I would be anxious. I would be nonstop thinking about what I had to do, my to-do list. I had no energy. I had a lot of mood symptoms too. So a lot of cycling between depression and anxiety, but there was this overwhelming feeling of apathy and even hopelessness. I had gained a lot of weight that I couldn't lose. My digestion was off. So everything was affected for me in adrenal fatigue. And that's actually pretty common for a lot of women. A lot of times, though, I've heard from my patients, they go in to see their doctor and their doctor says, they run some basic blood work. They might do a physical exam. And they say, there's nothing wrong. You're fine. And so the woman feels completely confused and alienated even because she doesn't have answers, but she knows she doesn't feel well. And sometimes, and even too often, I've heard this, that the next thing the doctor says is, it's all in your head. And now, on top of everything else, she also feels guilty because for some reason she's done this to herself. She doesn't even know how often, but now it's her fault because it's all in her head, quote unquote. And oftentimes doctors will offer medication like an antidepressant to these women, which rarely ever helps because it's not treating the problem. It's not treating the cause of what's going on. So adrenal fatigue is a really, really important thing to understand. It's something that I believe is a crisis in women's healthcare because it's not diagnosable by our typical Western methods. A functional medicine practitioner, like a naturopathic doctor, will do functional medicine testing, which is going to catch it, but traditional blood work typically does not. Now, our adrenal glands, this is another big picture. Our adrenal glands are meant to restore with proper care. So they're meant to heal, but it's really about healing that connection between adrenals and our brain. The big distinction I want to make here is with adrenal fatigue, which is a functional imbalance, and something like Addison's disease, which is an actual disease. And that requires the care of an endocrinologist because that is actually can put a person into a medical emergency. So Addison's disease is absolutely something that should be caught. Okay, so I want to break down this idea of what is a functional imbalance versus a disease. If you look at the top right of this slide, this is our current allopathic model. And this is why things like adrenal fatigue get missed because doctors are looking at health versus disease. So in their model, it's black or white. There's a straight line down between the two, and you're either in the world of health or you're in the world of disease. And so a woman can feel absolutely awful, but if her lab tests and maybe her physical exam, if he or she does one, shows that they're quote unquote normal, then hey, they're in the world of health and it's all in your head. It must be something that's going on inside of you, which leaves her feeling, again, she still feels awful, but now she feels guilty on top of it. In contrast, in functional medicine, which is the image on the lower left, it's all gray, right? So we do have these, this idea of disease. So there is actual disease, and that again is something like Addison's disease. Then there's this idea of health where not only are you healthy, but you feel great. But then there's this idea of a functional imbalance where you might not, quote unquote, have an actual disease, but there is an imbalance. There's something wrong and you can feel it because you just don't feel well. And that's where functional medicine shines. And we do a lot of functional testing to figure out where a woman is in this, within this model of health. So what is adrenal fatigue? Again, there can be a lot of symptoms. They can happen all over the body, and there are a lot of crossovers with other functional imbalances and other medical conditions. Things like chronic fatigue syndrome, PTSD is huge with adrenal fatigue, metabolic syndrome, thyroid issues, female hormone imbalance, chronic pain, autoimmune, fibromyalgia. So there are a lot of crossovers with adrenal fatigue and these other conditions. Specific symptoms, again, happen all over the body. They can be anything like daytime fatigue. I mentioned being wired but tired, which is oftentimes you're exhausted all day until your head hits the pillow and then you can't fall asleep, or you're waking up a lot in the middle of the night. Another thing Another example of extreme adrenal fatigue is when somebody can sleep for 12 to 14 hours a day and still wake feeling unrested. That is an extreme manifestation of adrenal fatigue. Weight gain that's centered at the waist is another sign of adrenal fatigue, and that is called a cortisol dominant body type, when a woman tends to gain weight at her center rather than at her hips or, arms and legs. Brain fog, I mentioned mood issues, depression, anxiety, apathy, hopelessness. There can be blood sugar issues, either chronically high blood sugar or chronically low blood sugar, despite lifestyle support. And so when we see somebody who is eating healthfully, who's exercising regularly, but their blood sugar is still creeping up, I think adrenals and I think toxic buildup right away. So we need to assess for those. Appetite changes. Her appetite can be increased or decreased. If it's increased, it's usually driven by cravings for sugar and or salt, which are, the sugar is kind of a temporary low energy fix. Salt is craved basically by our adrenal glands. Changes in blood pressure. Initially, we can see high blood pressure for no good reason in adrenal fatigue, but over time, blood pressure can become chronically too low. And they can also experience things like headaches, muscle aches, easy fatigability. So if a woman says, I went for a walk around the block and I was exhausted, that's a sign that there's something going on there. I mentioned this idea earlier, and I believe that adrenal fatigue is a crisis in women's health because women are natural givers. We are natural caregivers. Many of us want to, we naturally just want to take care of others. We also have a desire to, have our own things going on in the world. And so many of us are trying to manage the demands of, family, friends, maybe having a career or a hobby or a passion, something else that we're trying to accomplish in our lives. And so there's this natural desire to give and give and give, especially in the context of relationship, but also in the context of trying to develop ourselves as people. And so having this drive, whether it's for our career, for giving in some kind of another way, like a nonprofit, or giving to, participating in church or some kind of volunteer activity, but we tend to be givers. And what is not discussed enough in women's health is the idea of our needing self-care and the ways that we can be taking care of ourselves. And so adrenal fatigue is a pretty late stage manifestation of our drive as women to constantly be there for everyone else at the expense of ourselves. So we're trying to take care of others and we're not taking enough care of ourselves. We're not taking enough of our own energy and giving it to ourselves. I always think of the analogy of, when you get in a plane, you put your mask on before anyone else's. And that's something that we forget to do all the time. What if our mask is the idea of eating a healthy meal, going for a walk, going to bed early? What if that is all just part of, the idea of putting on our mask first? So that's what I try and talk a lot about with my patients, is this idea of putting yourself first, at least for a little while you're healing. Adrenal health comes naturally to us when we have a strong foundation of self-worth. So when we're coming from this idea of self-worth, which is the inherent understanding that we are valuable, we are important, and we deserve to be taken care of, we naturally develop good self-care habits that are grounded in self-worth and self-love. So a lot of times when I work with women, they're just women who have maybe tried other programs, they've tried other modalities, they've tried things that just haven't worked well for them. And usually what we have to do is go all the way back to the beginning and say, well, what's your relationship with your self-worth like? And so we have the opportunity to begin to understand, how she values herself and how she relates to herself and sees herself as important. This was a huge part of my healing journey too. And this was really an aha moment for me, because I was somebody who, as a naturopathic doctor, I knew all the things I needed to do, and I would do them for a little while, but then I would fall off the wagon, and I would, what I call the guilt and shame spiral. I would enter the guilt and shame spiral, which would make me feel horrible. And I would, basically self-soothe by choosing all those lifestyle things that I knew weren't very good for me, but which made me feel better in the moment. The sugar, the wine, the not exercising, all of those things. And then I would start to feel so bad because of that I would get back on the wagon and inevitably fall off again, because nobody's perfect. And I realized one day that what was lacking was not externally in my habits or even in my environment. It was about me relating to myself and making myself important in my own life. So I talk about this a lot with women who have been struggling to meet their health goals and feel better, because I really think that for those women, what's missing is that connection with self-worth. And it's vitally connected to our adrenal health. So how does adrenal health relate to low energy? Adrenal fatigue will absolutely affect energy production. Again, if you think about the idea of the brain and adrenal connection, if we're constantly experiencing stress, we're going to be constantly putting pressure on our adrenal glands, which is going to deplete our energy. The rocks here, I included this photo because for me, it's the idea of having balance. We're going to talk more about balance and how important that is, but we have to always be balancing the way that we're taking care of everything in our world, all of our external demands, and the way that we're taking care of ourselves. So the idea here is creating a healthy balance between all of those things in order to support adrenal health and optimize our energy production. So adrenal fatigue is energy consuming. It is not energy producing long-term. And the physical effects of living in a functional imbalance like adrenal fatigue are that you're wasting energy all day. There's no time for restoration, repletion, or rest. There is chronic depletion of energy on a physical, mental, and emotional level. We see hormone imbalances, we see toxic buildup and metabolic dysfunction, we see digestive issues, we see people starting to sleep really poorly. So even though they may be sleeping a good number of hours a night, if they're not entering that deep restorative sleep state, they're not going to be healing from their sleep. As you can imagine, this energy depletion is a huge cause of early cellular aging. And we all have our biological age, so a woman can be biologically, she can be 30 years old, but if she is depleting and overworking herself, maybe she's not taking very good care of herself, she can have a cellular age of a 40 or 45-year-old woman. In contrast, a 45-year-old woman who's taking good care of herself might have a cellular age that's closer to 30 or 35. So there is a real difference in distinction there. I also wanted to just introduce this idea of the mental, emotional, and spiritual symptoms of adrenal fatigue, because when we're in adrenal fatigue, we're also in a state of chronic stress. So our ability for higher thought, creative thought, that big picture problem solving thought process is shut down. Again, when we're in fight or flight, we're hyper focused on the saber-toothed tiger. We're hyper focused on the stressor. We do not have the capacity to expand our thought process. So higher thought is sacrificed because adrenal fatigue is energy consuming. It's very emotionally draining. And then we often find women have less resilience in their relationships. So as much as they might love or care for their partners, their parents, their children, their pets, they might find that they're snapping at them really easily. They're having a hard time sitting and listening to them. They're having a hard time trying to understand where they're coming from or relate to them because they're just so drained personally that they don't even have the energy to do that for themselves. So maintaining healthy relationships becomes really challenging. women get blamed for this all the time, but it's not as simple as saying, I've heard people were blamed for having hormonal issues, for being hormonal or menopausal, that they were blamed for, being, we all know the curse words that are associated with this, but really it's so much deeper than that, because it goes down to how she's valuing herself and how she's giving herself the time and attention and the rest that she needs. So I really want to stress that relationship issues can actually be a symptom of adrenal fatigue. The big picture here is that in adrenal fatigue, we see that there's a me focus, not a we focus, because she doesn't have the energy to relate to other people as well. And again, you'll see this picture show up, the picture in the lower left, a few times, because it's really about the idea of balance. We have to balance our needs versus our needs, the needs that the people in our lives have, the needs that our career, our work, our volunteer opportunities have. So it's really all about balance when we talk about adrenal fatigue and adrenal health. So how can we boost energy naturally in adrenal fatigue? This picture on the top left, I chose because I absolutely love it. It is a picture of a waterfall and then some water, and it's at night. This picture from a Chinese medical perspective is very yin. And I mentioned yin earlier. Yin is the, in Chinese medicine, it relates to what's called Jing Qi, which is that anti-aging Qi, and yin is the anti-aging substance inside of us. When we're living in adrenal fatigue and we're pushing, we're spending our Jing Qi. So if that's our savings account, we're constantly withdrawing from it. And that means we're depleting our yin. As we deplete our yin, we see early aging, we see hair loss, we see skin starts to age really rapidly. We see our eyes become less bright and shiny. We see that the quality of our nails gets dull. Maybe nails stop growing as quickly. It will also affect sleep. So a woman with yin deficiency will not be sleeping well. She'll be waking up often in the middle of the night. She might be experiencing hot flashes and or night sweats as well. One of the best ways to support adrenal health and to naturally promote our energy production is to set proper boundaries, because overexerting ourselves and overextending ourselves is really a manifestation of not having good boundaries between ourselves or our needs and the external world. So when we set a boundary, we're really talking about, we're drawing a line between what we'll accept as appropriate behavior from ourselves or from other people, and what we won't accept as appropriate behavior from ourselves and from other people. So we need to understand that setting a boundary, we can set boundaries with other people. We also have to set boundaries with ourselves. And when I start talking and working with women, we always start with the idea of what's a boundary that we can set for ourselves within the world of the habits, our self-care habits. And so for a woman, it might be something like, I won't eat sugar for the next, week or 10 days or 5 days. I'm not going to eat sugar. And that's an excellent boundary to set. It might be more of a behavioral boundary with other people. I won't try and anticipate what my husband wants for dinner and make that and then be upset when he doesn't want to eat it at night. I won't accept this person trying to manipulate me anymore. I won't accept my friend always breaking plans with me. So there are certain boundaries that we can set again with ourselves or with other people. But the idea here is that when we stop engaging in the behavior that we've set the boundary around, we're no longer expending the energy on, we're no longer wasting the energy that we would have wasted on that, whether it's eating sugar, which is actually very energy consuming and depleting, or it's, being really emotionally upset and hurt when our friend canceled on us for the 14th time. If you set a boundary around that, you say, for example, to your friend, I'm sorry, I'm not willing to make plans with you because you have constantly broken them. You're cutting yourself off from the possibility that you're going to go through the hurt cycle that you've been through in the past with that person. So again, boundaries are a critical first step in taking better care of ourselves. Diet, again, is a very, very important piece of self-care because it's how we're nourishing ourselves. So I introduced earlier the idea of high vibration foods versus low vibration foods. And you can think of it very simply as the idea of you want to eat foods that are as close as possible to their form on planet Earth. How were they growing when they were growing here? So veggies, fruits are excellent. Veggie and nut and seed oils are excellent. Animals, when we eat animal products, those that were raised in a happy, healthy environment with plenty of sunshine and healthy food and connection with other animals, that's a healthy animal. And that's really where we want our foods or our animal-based products coming from. We want to avoid low vibration foods, which again are those processed packaged foods full of chemicals, full of industrially processed meats and dairy. And then we want to follow an anti-inflammatory diet. And that's because inflammation is actually a chronic adrenal stressor. And so when we follow an anti-inflammatory diet, we're doing a huge service to our adrenals because we are removing the potential for chronic inflammation driving adrenal fatigue. Now, what is an anti-inflammatory diet? I get this question a lot and I love it. An anti-inflammatory diet, there are a lot of different ones available out there, but basically it's a lot of plants, very clean food, so mostly organic, and then avoiding any known or potential food allergens. And for me, for everyone, that is sugar. Some other big food allergens are things like gluten, dairy. For many people, corn, soy can be an issue, eggs can be an issue. So really that becomes more about knowing what works for your body and what doesn't work for your body. My top 3 that I usually recommend to patients are avoiding sugar, gluten or wheat, and dairy. Dairy is something that is inflammatory for most people. We just weren't meant to be consuming dairy products, which is a real bummer because I think most of us know that cheese is amazing, but it can be really hard on our system. And for a lot of people, some people do have an actual gluten sensitivity or gluten allergy, and that's called celiac disease. And that is actually very serious. For a lot of us, though, we have a gluten sensitivity, and I fall into this group of people because we can have inflammatory symptoms digestively when we eat gluten. And those can be things like bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea, anything that is stomach pains, anything that's uncomfortable. Oftentimes we're not responding to the gluten itself, we're responding to the glyphosate or the pesticides that were sprayed on wheat in our industrially processed food supply and food chain. So for most people, gluten is just a good one to cut out, at least for a while. You may notice I have somebody here with me. This is Khaki. She's just saying hi. The third piece of healing our adrenal glands and boosting energy production is routine. Our adrenal glands are ancient organs. And they're very closely related to our brain. They need some sense of routine and normalcy. And we have a lot of natural routines and rhythms. So there are daily rhythms, and that's our circadian rhythm, our sleep and wake cycle, which is regulated by our cortisol and melatonin relationship. That can be supported by daily exposure to sunlight and fresh air, taking regular breaks, deep breathing, even if we are doing a breathing practice for like 2 minutes at a time, and then taking some time for quiet time. Regular meals are another way that we can support our natural routines and rhythms. Regular meals are, we do that to support our blood sugar balance. Now, when we go into a fasting state, that can actually be an adrenal stressor. So there's a lot of talk now about intermittent fasting and how healthy it is. And I don't argue with that at all. But I think for women who are struggling with adrenal fatigue, it's actually a bad idea to be intermittent fasting. The first thing we need to do is get blood sugar levels under control. Regular meals are going to do that. And a simple tip here is that you do want to eat breakfast. You want to eat breakfast by 10 a.m. at the latest, because that's going to help your body get settled, get grounded, and start to regulate the cortisol levels in your body. The other piece is that having a regular routine also helps us regulate our other hormonal cycles. And so for women, that can be our female hormones, so our 28 to 32 day cycles. And knowing what we need throughout our monthly cycles is also really important. Generally, in the beginning of our cycles, we tend to have more energy. So that's a great time to be doing more energetic things. And then towards the end of our cycle is a great time for us to be slowing down a little bit, maybe going for more walks, getting more introspective, and journaling is another big one. So it's more quiet time, more energy, conservation, more meditation, things like that. Sleep, so important, because sleep is all about really deeply resting and repairing our bodies. Sleep helps to restore brain power. It repairs cell damage throughout our bodies. Sleep also helps us naturally support our hormone cycles, because when we're sleeping, we are our circadian rhythm is regulating itself. And when our circadian rhythm regulates, it really helps all of our other hormonal systems get rebalanced. Sleep, healthy sleep here, a simple tip is goes right back to routine. So setting a regular bedtime and a regular wake time within about 30 minutes, 7 days a week is actually really, really important. So honoring our routines, honoring our cycles is critical here. So I wanted to give you this little piece because these are some concrete things that we can all do for ourselves. Food, as far as food goes, I always tell people three big picture things. One, eat regular meals. We talked about why that's important. 2, anti-inflammatory foods or an anti-inflammatory diet, huge way to reduce adrenal gland stress. And then the third is this. To help regulate blood sugar, you always want to eat fat and fiber together. Fat and fiber are the 2 macronutrients that are going to help balance our blood sugar best. And high fiber foods are things like veggies are great. Root veggies can be great, things like sweet potatoes and squash. And then whole grains, if you can tolerate them, those are also excellent. Good things to drink. Now, I'm a fan of coffee, and I think that for most of us, coffee is okay, unless we need to take a break from it for a short while, which oftentimes women will have to, especially if they're super adrenally fatigued. But we know more once we get a sense of her history. But when I have coffee, I like to have it with cinnamon and then an adaptogenic mushroom blend. Things like chaga, reishi, maitake, shiitake are all excellent. And there are a lot of great products out there. Green tea is excellent because not only does it have a small amount of caffeine to help give us some alertness, it also has something called L-theanine, which is a very healthy, very safe amino acid that helps regulate mood and a sense of calm. So when women aren't drinking coffee, I tell them, go ahead and have some green tea in the morning, because it's actually going to help give you that boost while keeping you feeling calm. Sparkling mineral water, because minerals tend to get very depleted in adrenal fatigue. So sparkling mineral water is a great way to start to replenish our minerals. Teas with certain herbs, ashwagandha is an amazing adaptogen. So it's going to really heal the connection between our adrenal glands and our brain. I think of it as being, if you ever, been driving down the highway and you see the construction going on, it's like those little construction workers on the highway between our adrenal glands and our brain. Turmeric is great because it's anti-inflammatory. Chamomile and passion flower are both very, very calming. Chamomile is going to work a little bit more on the digestive system, so calming digestive symptoms. And then passion flower is going to work really well on the brain and helping us feel more calm. Now, with any of these, it is really important that you talk with your doctor before just adding in any herbs, just in case there are any interactions, because for some people there are drug and herb interactions that we really have to be aware of. So the last piece here is activities. Setting the appropriate lifestyle measures in place is super important for energy boosting, and I'll let you read through all of these at your leisure. I know we're getting towards the end of our hour here and I want to respect your time. But again, daily routine, if we can do some sort of meditative reflective activity, that's going to go so far in helping you restore and repair adrenal health and energy production. That can be journaling, which was huge for me, a daily gratitude practice. It can be a meditation. It can be a daily walk. Any of those are great examples of daily adrenal support activities. So here's how I work with patients. I'll let you read through this as well, but really there's a 5-phase care system that I take people through. And the idea is we start by reconnecting a woman with her sense of self-worth and setting some boundaries. And then we work on digestion so that she can start to actually absorb her food and heal from the inside out. Once we have our digestion working, then we're detoxifying. We're helping her body pull out all the toxins that were building up inside of her cells, because that's how we start to restore healthy metabolism. Once we know her metabolism is functioning better, then we start to actually rebalance hormones. And by hormones, I mean thyroid, adrenal, and sex hormones. So that's male, female hormones, and then sleep hormones, and melatonin is a big one there. Finally, once we have all that in place, we move to the 5th phase, which is optimize. And optimize is all about setting a long-term plan that's going to support her health. And we do use some advanced functional medicine testing throughout this. And in phase 5, we're actually doing some genetic testing to see what is her inherent metabolic capacity and how do we best nurture that long-term. So what's next? A couple things. If you'd like and we're not already connected on Instagram, definitely follow me on Instagram, because I try and post as much information and educational content as I can there. There's a little link at the bottom here, and you'll have a link to this on the slide I send. If you'd like to learn more about how I work one-on-one with people, you're welcome to schedule a discovery call. I've opened up a few extra slots today and next week as well to accommodate you if you'd like to talk more about that. Okay, and I think that's all I have for you right now. If you have any questions, I'd love for you to pop them in the chat, and we can go through that before we say goodbye. And I do want to go ahead and thank you for spending your time here. And if you do have any questions, if you could please post them in the chat, that would be perfect, because then I can see them. What fat to eat with fiber? That's a great question. So there are a lot of different types of fat out there. And a lot of them are really good and really healthy. So generally speaking, for all of us, plant-based fats are great. So that's going to be your plant-based oils, things like avocado oil, avocado itself. Olive oil is great, walnut oil, hazelnut oil, hemp seed oil, and then the oily nuts and seeds, things like hemp seed, chia seed, flax seed are all great. Coconut is excellent. Coconut's going to work a little bit differently than these other fats because it's very healing to the digestive tract. It's also very healing for the nervous system. So it's another great fat to eat with fiber. And For people who eat animal products, that's also a great potential source of healthy fats. I always say eat grass-fed meats if you're going to eat meats, because those are that's a higher source of omega-3s, the anti-inflammatory fats. Industrially processed meats and a lot of farm-raised fish have high levels of pro-inflammatory fats, and those animals also are higher in stress hormones. So we want to avoid that. Finally, if you are eating animal products, ghee is a really great source of healthy fat. And so is, cold water wild caught fish. And so of course, everybody's favorite there is wild caught salmon. So that's another great example. And then how do you handle hormone rebalance with women in menopause? Such a great question. And it's very much individualized. It depends first on A, what are her symptoms? What is she feeling? And then B, we do hormone testing to see where her hormone levels are. And once we know that, we know how much of this can be addressed with lifestyle. For a lot of women, even women going through menopause, we can address things with diet and lifestyle, and that's going to help her body naturally rebalance. Some women need a little bit more support, especially as they're going through menopause. And so we can certainly consider the idea of adding in adrenal, adding in bioidentical hormones. And that usually looks like supplementing with estrogen, progesterone, and occasionally DHEA or testosterone. It all depends on the woman. And we always start with understanding how's she feeling now? How has she been feeling throughout her cycle? What's her history with her hormonal health? And then, what do the labs say? What's a safe option for her? So those are the things I always take into account. Prepared mushroom coffee products you would suggest. That's such a great question. And there is one that I absolutely love. And I want to get the name right because it's on my shelf. So I'm going to include that in my follow-up email to you. I'm going to include the name of the product because I don't want to tell you the wrong thing right now. I'm just making myself a little note. And then someone asked a really great question too about, who can I work with as a naturopathic doctor? So I can see patients in a one-on-one setting in Arizona and Washington states, and I can also work with people in America and Canada, and it looks a little bit different, but I do have products available and I have services available that can really help serve women throughout the world. So if you have questions about how I can help you personally, I would absolutely encourage you to schedule a discovery call with me. I popped the link to that in the chat. So you're welcome to hit that and we can talk later today, or we can talk next week about how I can help you and I can understand a little bit more about what your specific needs are. Because again, this is something that I lived through and I felt so miserable with it that my goal is to really help keep women out of ever feeling like this, because it's lonely, it's miserable. There's a lot of hopelessness and a lot of despair that goes with it. So if you're feeling that way, I do not want you to struggle anymore. Feel free to schedule that discovery call so that we can talk a little bit more about what you need and how I can help you. Does anybody have any other questions before we wrap up and say goodbye for today? Give you guys just a second. And again, I just want to one more time say thank you so much for spending your time with me today. This is one of my favorite things to do is share this information. And I really hope that you got something out of it today. It's my pleasure and my joy to empower women this way. Something I love to do. So thank you again for spending your time with me. I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing now. And just say thank you. All right, there we go. Okay, thank you all so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful day and take good care. Don't forget to, if you have any questions, you can always email me. Like I said, I'm going to send out the replay answers to some questions as well. So that's a great place to head to if you have any questions. Take care. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.